Hey guys, Matthew here, and welcome to episode number 5 of the Abusing Harvest series. And today, we're talking about physical-based weapons. So I say physical-based weapons because it doesn't matter what you're trying to craft, be it a staff, a foil, an exquisite blade, a flesh ripper, a bow. If it's a physical-based weapons, these are going to be the two methods that you can do to craft the best potential physical weapons in the league. Now, this is going to be a little bit of a longer video because there's a lot of steps that we need to go through, but I'll try to get through them as fast as possible. So, essentially, we're going to talk about the first method, which is going to be the fractured mod method. The fractured mod method is the second best way to get the best weapons in the game, but it is a much cheaper way compared to the influence reroll method. So what a fractured mod is, as you can see, is something like this. It's going to look brownish, and this mod will never change. So if I go ahead and regal this, right, I get a random prefix. It doesn't really matter. If I spam some chaos orbs on it, you'll see that this mod, the brown mod, never changes. It never changes because it's fractured on the item. And that's what's so strong about this, because it lets you basically target whatever mod that you want and be able to craft without ever needing to get that mod again. So we can take advantage of that by fracturing the rarest mods in the game when it comes to crafting weapons, which are both Merciless, which is T1 percentage physical damage, and Dictators, which is T1 Hybrid, which both have a weighting of 25. Now, if you compare that to, say, T1 Attack Speed, which has a weighting of 1,000, you're like 50 times more likely to get attack speed. So you really don't want to be doing this fractured stuff unless you're going with either Merciless or Dictators, in my opinion. Now, some people would say that fracturing Flaring has some potential, but given the fact that it's got a weighting of 200, it's like 10 times more likely to roll than the other two. Therefore, personally, when I'm doing fractured weapons, I only ever do Merciless or Dictators. As you can see, I have a Merciless Valax here, and I have a Dictator's Valax, and I would not be doing anything else when it comes to fracturing. So let's get over real quick how to fracture an item. So the first thing I needed to explain is basically how to dupe an item in Path of Exile. Now, you would think that that's TOS, or against Terms of Service, duping items, but in PoE there's actually a method to dupe items so long as they are blue bases, and you can do this forever, and it doesn't break any Terms of Service. So how we do this is we use beasts. So I'm not going to be able to show you because I don't have any yellow beasts at the moment, but I'll still explain step by step. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to get ourselves a base. So for example, here I have a Dictator's Valax. You could do this by either buying it from somebody else or alt spamming it yourself. It doesn't really matter. The important part, though, is that you want your base to have 30% quality beforehand. The way that you get 30% quality on a base is using a perfect fossil. Perfect fossil will give you a random quality modifier between 15 and 30. Therefore, it takes on average 15 to get yourself a 30 quality base. But once you have the base, once it's 6 links, once it's got the white sockets, once it's got the 30 quality, it's much more worth it to dupe the base than to just make a new base every time, because you don't have to worry about, you know, the perfect fossils, the fusings to link it, or the alterations required to get yourself these mods, because Dictators and Merciless are seen once every like 3,000 alterations, which is very uncommon. So let's go over, once you have your initial base, the first thing you're going to want to do is basically make a copy for yourself, so that if you want to do multiple of them, you'll always have a safe copy in your stash that you can just dupe again and try again. So the first thing you're going to want to do is dupe it. How you're going to do that is use a Chrysic Kimmeral. Once you kill the Chrysic Kimmeral and the other rare beasts, an imprint will fall on the ground. So an imprint looks a little something like this, and is basically a save state of your item. If you've been playing PoE for a long time, you'll see that basically this is the exact same thing as an Eternal Orb, except an Eternal Orb would work on a rare item with any amount of mods, and was basically, and is still basically in Standard, the only way to really perfect an item to 6 tier 1 without having, well, this league mechanic, because this league mechanic is essentially an infinite amount of Eternal Orbs, which doesn't make any sense, but as Chris said, this league was, you know, going to break the game, which it probably kind of did, at least for standard players. So once you've got your save state, you're going to want to regal this base that you have, because you can always bring it back to what it used to be. Now, the important part about this save state here and the imprint is that this imprint is basically tied to the item ID, which is unique, of your initial item. So my Dictator's Valax here is a blue item. I have the imprint for it. Well, this isn't, but let's say it was. I would go ahead and regal my Dictator's Valax, which is now a new item, because obviously it has another stat on it, but the item ID is the exact same, therefore the imprint is linked to it. Now what I would do is I would split the item into two, and using a Phenomenal Plagued Arachnid, and therefore the 2 mod item, one mod being Dictator and the other being whatever you regaled, is now going to be split into 2, and since a 1 mod item can be magic, it's going to drop 2 magic item. So the first magic item is going to stay on your altar, which is the item that matches the ID of your imprint, while another brand new item is going to drop on the ground, and you cannot use the imprint on it. Which is why when duping an item, it's never guaranteed to actually have a success. Because, let's say I regal fire resistance on my Dictator's Valax, so I go ahead and regal it, and I hit fire res, and then I split it. If the item on the altar has fire resistance, well, this item is actually linked to the item ID of my imprint, therefore, if I imprint it back, this fire res is going to go all the way back to what it used to be, which was initially a Dictator's Valax. Now, that means that if I have fire resistance on this item here, the other item that dropped on the ground, the brand new item, would also have Dictators. Therefore, I have successfully duped my item, which was a Dictator's Valax. At which point, I can go ahead and store my Dictator's Valax, because I want to have at least a copy for myself that I can keep duping to keep making more. And then the other one is the one that we are going to be continuing our crafting with. So that's essentially how that works. So it's a 50-50 basically when doing so. The important part to remember though, and a good way to save a little bit of currency, is that if you imprint a 1 mod item and you fail the split, the 1 mod item is basically going to keep its 1 mod. So in this case, my Dictator's Valax would stay a Dictator's Valax, while the item would drop on the ground would be the failed split. What I can do, I don't need to re-imprint it. I can just throw another regal at it and split it again, meaning you can actually save the cost of the imprints when doing 1 mod items. That being said, this can't be done when it comes to 2 mod items. So for example, if I was duping this Merciless Jeweled Foil of the Essence, since it has 2 mods, when I split it, there is a 1 in 3 chance. You would think it's a 1 in 6, because if I'm splitting a 3 mod item, the combinations, the potential permutations of items would basically lead to 6 different items, but there is an unwritten rule that when splitting a 3 mod item, the item that drops on the ground will always have 2 mods. So if it has 3 mods, and I'm looking for one combination of 2 different mods, and it's guaranteed to drop 2 mods, it's a 1 in 3 chance. The only problem, though, when it comes to duping 2 mod items, is that the item that stays on the altar will always have 1 mod left, since the item on the ground has 2, and your initial one has 3. Therefore, you're always going to need to re-imprint when it comes to duping 2 mod items, which makes it a little bit more expensive to dupe those, because not only is it a 1 in 3 instead of a 1 in 2, but you have to use an imprint every time, which at the moment go for about 0.5 exalts each. But that is essentially how you dupe items. Now let's get into the fracturing portion of the video. So once you have your copy of your base, you're gonna go ahead and store that. So you have just the one that you're going to be crafting with at that point. And what you're going to do is you're going to basically be doing the same thing. You're going to want to imprint that base again. So the reason you're imprinting the base again is that when you fracture it, it's not guaranteed to hit what you want. At least not anymore, since they fixed that. So it's going to be a 1 in 3 chance to fracture the right mod. But what's interesting is that if you fracture, let's say, a wrong mod, you can always imprint it back, and it's going to take the item back to a non-fractured state, meaning if you failed the fracture, instead of having a completely useless item that you can just vendor for a divine orb since it's 6 linked, you can imprint it back, and instead of having to dupe it again, which is the expensive part of the whole thing, you can just re-imprint it for 0.5x and then try again. So once you have your item and it's imprinted, it's basically safe. The first thing you're going to want to do is augment it. Now, what you augment doesn't actually matter whatsoever because we're going to get rid of that. And then you're going to wriggle it, which again, whatever you get doesn't matter. If you wriggle a suffix, that means you would have your dictators and then your 2 suffixes, that's okay. And if you wriggle a prefix, that's okay. It really doesn't matter what you get, because if you wriggled a prefix, that's perfectly fine. And if you wriggled a suffix, then you're going to want to use the Ferric Wolf Alpha, which adds a random prefix and removes a random suffix. So that's going to take care of getting rid of your suffixes and add some prefixes. So you're going to have to use this at least once if you wriggle the prefix and twice if you wriggle the suffix. Fortunately, these beasts are very, very cheap, so they're like 10 or 15C. So then once you've done that, you're going to be left with a rare item with 3 prefixes, at which point it's ready to be fractured, and you have an imprint, which is basically your fail safe. So you'll go ahead and head to whatever is the Discord you're using to buy some crafts, or if you have some of your own, and you're going to look for basically fracture an item, fracture a random prefix on an item fracture the prefix of an item with at least 3 prefixes, something like that at least, and those go for about 1 exalt each at the moment. So it's a 1 in 3 chance, and it's going to cost you 1 exalt. And if you fail the fracture, you can always imprint it back and then go through the whole process again. Imprint it once again, augment, wriggle, Ferric Wolf once or twice, fracture. And after an average of 3 attempts, you will get basically your fractured item, which you can basically start crafting from there. I would advise, obviously, when crafting physical weapons to spam jagged fossils, because since you have one of the rarest mod in the game, guaranteed to be on it, then all you need to realistically get is either flaring or tempered, and then some high of the other hybrid or percent physical damage, and then you can always finish off the suffixes by multi-modding them or with the lean mechanic fairly easily. So that is how you would make, for example, a 650 DPS foil or a 1000 DPS Valax and stuff like that. It's fairly easy to make, honestly, and it's not all that expensive. If you compare that to, say, any other league, trying to make a 600 DPS foil would have cost you an insane amount. For example, last league, I was trying to make a 600 DPS foil for days, and in the entirety of the league, I probably tried over 100 times, and I did it twice or 3 times. So this league, you can basically be duping them and then fracturing them and then just printing them very, very easily. Now, the second method, which is going to be the Endgame method, is going to be how to make the true GG items, which are going to be the most physical damage in the entire game, aside from very, very good synthesized implicits. So this method is going to have a few extra steps, but it starts the same way. So you're going to go ahead and dupe your base first. You always want to have a safe base laying around, so that no matter what happens, if something goes wrong, or if somebody scams you, or if you, I don't know, whatever happens, you always have a safe base. So you're going to go and dupe yourself an extra base first off. Then, once your extra base is duped, the first thing we're going to do is, it pretty much goes the same way, is that we're going to go ahead and imprint, our item, so that we have our save state, so no matter what happens, we can always take it back. Now, once that's done, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to wriggle this item. So it doesn't matter if we really get a prefix or a suffix, anything goes. So if we get a prefix, if we get a suffix, no big deal, because no matter what we get, we are going to be using the league mechanic to remove a non-physical modifier and add a new physical modifier. So that's going to be really easy, say if you had only Merciless, because the only thing it's going to be able to hit is that random thing that you just regaled. Unfortunately, when it comes to, let's say, a Merciless Jeweled Foil of the Essence, attack speed is a non-physical modifier. Therefore, there's always a chance of hitting your attack speed when doing so. Fortunately, non-physical to physical are like 20 chaos each, so it's very, very cheap per attempt. So the first thing you do is you do non-physical to phys. So looking on it right now, you'll see that the average of hitting flaring when doing non-phys to phys is like a 70 attempt to actually get flaring, and those are like 20 to 30 C each. So realistically speaking, it's not that expensive because you can't roll the percent physical damage. You can only roll hybrid or physical damage leaches life, physical damage leaches mana, or the flat fizz, which is what we want. An important part of this, though, is that physical damage leaches life and physical damage leaches as mana are both physical tags, so they can roll. Fortunately, physical damage leaches as life has the life tag, therefore you can remove it using the league mechanic by removing a life modifier. The physical damage leaches mana, on the other hand, cannot be removed through the league mechanic, but fortunately for us, you can actually craft that. So as you can see, there is a mod, physical attack damage leaches mana, which you can craft, which is a suffix for some odd reason, for 1 regal. Which, if you pay attention here and look at the physical damage leached as mana, you'll see that the mod group is mana leech. So if I go ahead and look at that, you'll see that the crafting bench suffix also has the mod pool, the mod group mana leech. It is impossible to have the same exact mod group twice on an item. Therefore, if I craft it, it can't roll. So if it can't roll and I can't get rid of it, that's good because that means that I can't really mess up my item. If I get physical damage leached as life, I can always remove it through removing life, and then I can craft on any random modifier and do non-phys to phys. Remember though, when doing so, there will be a 50% chance of hitting your attack speed, at which point you don't really have a choice but to try again, which means imprint it back, and then imprint it again, regal again. So let's go ahead and take an example of, let's say that you go ahead and regal fire resistance. So now you would have Merciless, which, by the way, when it comes to these bases, you only want to be using Merciless. That is the only thing that you want, because the hybrid physical damage is going to be acquired through the Conqueror's Exalted Orbs and the Conqueror mods, and the physical damage, or the flat physical is easy to acquire, and there's nothing else you care about. Therefore, the only true mod you want to be using is going to be, is going to be Merciless in this case. Something very important to note, unlike the fractured mods where you can actually use dictators just fine. So once you, let's say, regal fire resistance, the next thing you're going to want to do is craft on physical damage leached as mana to block it. Then you're going to do remove non-physical and add physical. So in this case, since Merciless is a physical mod, the mana mod is a physical mod, the only thing it's going to hit is either your fire resistance or your attack speed. And then that is going to be turned into a physical mod. That could be either hybrid physical, physical damage leaches life, or flat physical, because you can't get the percent since you already have it on your item. So there's a 50% chance again to remove your attack speed, at which point you try again. But if you hit the fire resistance, that becomes a physical mod. Depending on what you get, you either keep going or try again. So let's say you did that and then you get a hybrid physical mod. You can always use remove physical mod and add a new physical mod. Therefore, it's going to get rid of the hybrid and add on, well, potentially hybrid again or flat. That being said, when doing remove fizz and add fizz, there is always a chance to hit your Merciless, 50%. And if you do so, well, you don't really have a choice, unfortunately, but to try again. So imprint and imprint back. That being said, the odds when doing non-fizz to fizz or fizz to fizz is literally 1 in 70. And considering they're only 20-30 chaos each, it's pretty cheap. You can realistically get yourself a base with Merciless, Flaring, and Essence attack speed for like 20 exalts, which is absolutely crazy in the grand scheme of actually when you consider how good that actually is. So if you hit physical damage leashes life, you can always do fizz to fizz, or you can do remove a life modifier, craft something else, and do non-fizz to fizz. Because if you do non-fizz to fizz, there is no chance of hitting your merciless, but there's a chance of hitting your essence attack speed. So the question becomes, do you want to risk your essence attack speed more, or do you want to risk your merciless more? In reality, it doesn't matter, because if you're trying to go for like the best potential fizz damage, you're going to need both. Therefore, just do fizz to fizz and don't worry about that. Keep your physical damage leashes mana on there, because that acts as a very good block. As you can see, there is a almost 6% chance of rolling this. Therefore, that mod itself cannot be rolled anymore, so that's good. Then, that being said, quickly, when doing fizz to fizz, your physical damage leashes mana, even if it's crafted, it is a physical mod, and it can be rerolled into something else that's a physical mod. Therefore, there's always a chance that your physical damage leashes mana becomes, let's say, physical damage leashes life, or, once again, physical damage leashes mana, at which point you can't remove it. So you kind of just have to go and start over, imprint back, and then regal, non-fizz to fizz, and go through the whole process again until you get flaring. Now let's go ahead and fast forward to when you do have flaring. So you would have your merciless, your flaring, and your essence attack speed, or T1 attack speed, whatever it is, or no attack speed. It really is up to you. At that point, you're going to want to slam a Conqueror's Exalt, and I would probably say Warlord is the best, because it has the hybrid of physical damage and attack speed, which leads to the highest potential physical damage outside of very good synthesis implicit bases. So because of that, I would always go with Warlord in this league, because while it is a less, there is less chance of you hitting hybrid fizz. It's actually a 1 in 7 chance, I believe, when rolling a prefix. When it comes to a Crusader, it's a 1 in 4 chance of hitting the hybrid, but you don't get the hybrid attack speed, so it loses a lot of its value compared to potentially getting the really, really high tier of hybrid fizz and attack speed, which lead to, you know, things like the 700 plus DPS foil that I was working on this league. So, the first thing you'd want to do is make sure to slam a prefix. So if you had merciless, flaring, and then your essence attack speed, or your T1 attack speed, whatever it is, to make sure that you slam a prefix, you need to fill in the suffixes. The easiest way to do that is to simply craft can have multiple crafted modifiers, and then craft any other suffix, which would lead you to having 3 suffixes. Now, if you want to save yourself a little bit of money, what you could actually do instead is, say, craft on any mod. It doesn't really matter. It could be, say, for example, fire damage, any prefix, and then you could augment 2 suffixes that you don't care about. So, for example, you could augment a fire suffix, which is pretty much guaranteed to be fire resistance, and aug a cold suffix, which is pretty much guaranteed to be cold resistance. And then you can slam your Warlord Exalt, and you'll always be able to remove these mods later, because there's no mods that you care about that has these tags. The only tags that you care about is either speed and physical and attack. So anything fire, lightning, cold, whatever, doesn't really matter. Therefore, you can just augment if you want to save the 2x instead. At which point you would slam the Warlord Exalt, and then no matter what you get, it's not that big of a deal, because you can always reroll it with seeds by doing either remove a random influence modifier and then add a new influence modifier to try again. So long as you have no open suffixes, it's always going to be prefixes. Or the other thing that you can do is remove and re-add a new influence modifier. The odds of getting T1 hybrid physical damage and attack speed, at least on the foil that I was making, was a 1 in 127, and the odds of getting any hybrid was like 1 in 20 or so. So pretty rare mods to show up, but that doesn't really matter. That doesn't matter that much, because technically over the course of a league, so long as you're actually farming and, you know, getting those T4 seeds, which are called Primal Blister Fruit, by the way, there's always going to be, an extra reroll there, an extra reroll here. If you have a lot of funds, like I personally had, I spent over 6 mirrors trying to do this. That being said, note that I did get extremely unlucky. I went through over 300 rerolls. So in terms of statistics, I had a 90% chance to hit it within 300 rerolls. But I got unlucky. Maybe you'll get lucky and get it in 2 rerolls. Maybe you won't see it like me. But in the end, technically, so long as you keep rerolling it, it's going to end up happening over the course of the league. And you can basically make yourself a juicy 700 DPS weapon, which hasn't existed pretty much ever since Synthesis. And I believe even in Synthesis there was only a single foil that had over 700 DPS, and in Standard currently I believe there's only 2 of them, one of them being over 800, but that is a Standard foil, which is truly unbeatable, which, nobody is going to acquire this league, but still, having being able to make a 700 plus DPS foil, to put it in perspective, last league the highest DPS foil was mirrored over 100 times, I believe, and it had 681 DPS. So that's essentially all I had for this video. Hopefully that explains how to craft physical based weapons, because they are pretty hard to craft, but this league they've been made very, very easy to craft, so long as you have a little bit of currency laying around. The influence mod rerolling strategy I would not recommend unless you have a lot of currency, while the other method, the fractured mod, if you have even as much as 10 exalts laying around, you can make yourself a fairly good weapon, which you can sell for decent profit for sure. So before I go, though, I do want to say a huge thank you to my supporters: Gaikona, Kfish, Zachary Luro, Scott, Dr. Radu, Casticus, Francesco, Amazo Skorov, Mr. Coffee, Mario, and Jungle Dog, which I forgot to add, and anybody else who wishes to remain anonymous, as well as anybody else who supports me through different platforms. Hopefully you guys learned something from this video, and if I forgot anything, let me know in the comment section. And that'll be Matthew signing out. Until the next one. Peace.